clocks are at 13:30. The title of the talk is Frontex, the European Secret Service. This talk is being translated by Duckman and Flo.
Was könnte man denn da tun, wenn das Smart Home plötzlich die Smart EU ist und du hast nicht nur eine...
So, think about smart home. All those surveillance technologies that you have in your home. Now, what if we had a smart EU with all those cameras up in the air, blimps, satellites, and so on? What can happen with this is what Matthias is going to tell you now. Applause, please.
Ja, viele Leute denken, wenn sie Frontex hören, an
a lot of people think if they hear Frontex, but a big room that is very full and the more people that come in, the more have to be sent back. That doesn't work that way, because if someone is standing at the border, you cannot really send them back. Because they might have used a transit country, there might not be a possibility to send them back. And what you see here is the current migratory map from Frontex, from the website. And what I'll focus on this talk is the region, the central Mediterranean, and especially Operation Themis of Frontex. It's a new mission that replaces an old Frontex mission and replaces an old Italian mission, Mare Nostra. The European Union wasn't a great fan of that, forcing Italy to replace that mission with currently Operation Themis. That isn't really a sea rescue mission, but is a mission of surveillance stretching from Malta about 2,000 kilometers. It's not just in the Mediterranean, but just not the whole Mediterranean, but just one small stretch of coast. It's not part of it also stretches in parts of Spain and elsewhere. But this talk focuses on Frontex, and that's why I want to explain what else Frontex does, because I called it the Border Secret Service. Frontex defines a pre-border area for which it's responsible, and that area stretches far into Africa. So they created reports for Mali in the extreme. So generally they focus on the Mediterranean, but also on the North African coasts and Libya. Frontex has what they call a multi-purpose flight surveillance service, operating with drones since October of this year. I think you should see the drone in this picture. This drone carries a logo of Frontex. It's an Israeli product that also flies in Afghanistan, and here it's used for Frontex, typically used by the military. In the case of Frontex, they fly without armament and are used to surveil the Mediterranean after a long series of pilot projects with smaller and bigger drones, and now with this drone in production. They also have different projects using balloons and aerostatic elements, flying lighter than air vehicles, and have been doing that for a long time. They did the same thing with the drones. After a long series of pilot projects, they now went into production. And they not only generate this surveillance data, but they also stream it to central processing facility. And Frontex is also occupied with improving the processing of this intelligence in collaboration with other agencies like the EMSA and the EFCA, who also use drones. And these agencies now share imagery they create with the drones. So in general, Frontex has a very good picture of what's happening in the Mediterranean, and uses that to generate a picture of the situation. Their participation in military operations, in improving the processing and combination of such imagery, attempting to create an extremely high resolution picture of the region created from satellite and aerial imagery to be able to post hoc identify movement in the region. Frontex also uses Eurosur, which is a system combining the surveillance capacities of several states. Each state already surveils their own borders on land and on sea. And what Frontex does with Eurosur is pull together all of that data from several states, and Frontex becomes the situation center to combine all of that data from various states. Eurosur is also undergoing an upgrade. So every year more and more money flows into these central sites, especially for surveillance technology. But a lot more important than that is the system called Copernicus, which is a part of Eurosur, one could say. But more generally speaking, Copernicus is the European satellite program that covers multiple areas, starting with climate change, melting polar caps, agriculture, how many fields were trampled in agriculture for G8. But the same imagery is also used to surveil borders. That's the central aspect of it. The satellites, I believe, are not all in operation currently. It's supposed to be a constellation of 6 Sentinels. But as soon as the first series of satellites is going to be completed, Copernicus is already working on a second generation with higher resolution. What you see here is a map of refugee camps in Morocco, attempted to create with a couple satellites. The only place I was able to find this in the internet is a presentation of the EU satellite program, the program that is responsible to manage and distribute the imagery created with these European satellites. The person who held the talk, which was then published by Netzpolitik and asked to have that image deleted from our Netzpolitik post, which we did not do, he said that yes, of course, this technology is also used for border surveillance. For example, at the Spanish enclave in Morocco, which is an important aspect of Frontex. Of course, also this system is being continuously improved. Ship tracking is especially easy for big vessels from space. So if ships try to evade detection, they unregister, but they're invisible to transponders and to radar. But from space, it's pretty easy to spot these ships, even if they are scheduled for decommissioning or anything. And Frontex can track the status of these ships from space. And I would claim that the big freighters that existed a couple of years ago with people from Turkey that moved to Europe, that were a relatively safe way to save refugees from Turkey and bring them to Europe. They were called ghost ships here, maybe you remember. Up until a couple of weeks, there were 3 big ships, and that suddenly stopped, and I claim that this is because it's now possible to surveil these ships from space and track where they're moving.
Frontex is also the first customer of what's called the Space Information Superhighway. This graphic shows it. They shot up 3 laser-based comm satellites. And the problem with satellites is that you need line of sight to a ground station to be able to send down data. So with that, you lose a lot of time. If you have a comms network up in orbit, you can connect to your satellites wherever they are via the network and downlink data in near real time. The first and second satellites of the trio have been launched, and Frontex uses them for the Copernicus system. So to get reconnaissance data without delay and work with it. Another thing you have is GEOINT and SIGINT. And UNAFORMET is an external military mission of the European Union that is also staffed by the Bundeswehr. And they're active in the Mediterranean with all sorts of planes and ships. And you can imagine what sort of reconnaissance capabilities these military ships, planes, and helicopters have, including signals intelligence, so listening into certain regions, and they use it to combat human trafficking. The question is, how do you do it? The Italians and Greeks usually send out some U-boats to find human traffickers, and the success, in quotes, of those missions is that they captured about 150 people who they say trafficked humans. I say in most cases these were just the guys operating the engine when the boat happened to be caught. But they say that makes them responsible, but well, yeah. The information from this system is of course distributed, and Frontex gets a copy, where they try to use the data to analyze networks, and they founded an organization named Criminal Information Cell to make it more legal to transfer military data to civilian operators. The European Defense Agency has its own projects, so Marisa, it's running for 9 or 10 years, I think. It's not a research project, but more an operational one, where some ministries of defense, the interior and such are doing research and exercise together to improve the surveillance of the seas. They try to have as much shielding layers as possible. You can't see it quite here, but there are various data layers, and the amount of information in total is used to differentiate between suspicious and non-suspicious ships. So a ship is on a defined route between ports, doesn't start at some beach somewhere, and this is done via software. What the European Defense Agency also does is a research program named Ocean 2020, where drone swarms cooperating with maritime assets are used to gather data for military purposes, and here the system is used to get border relevant data. Tests for this will soon happen. You should keep your eyes open. It looks like it will happen on the coast of Sweden. There's a Europol HQ, the Center Against the Smuggle of Migrants. That is Europol, which is the police as opposed to border guards of the EU, and they fling information back and forth 3 years ago, they introduced a mechanism for combating terrorism, where certain contents online are removed without actually being illegal. In about 90% of cases. It's mostly Facebook or YouTube posts or user accounts. And they removed around 1,000 instances of content about how to help people escape across the border. Europol calls this human trafficking criminality. But, well, people who want to cross the sea to Europe might look at a Facebook group to get advice. And if you remove this advice, these groups or postings, and people won't know how to do it, they will look for or get more expensive traffickers or not use the right equipment.
Over the past couple of years, the budget for Frontex was increased every year. What I have a comparison is 3 years ago, the price was about 3 million or so, 3 billion or so. Now that the budget was increased by about 600 million every year, with the goal of approximately 11 billion, with a dynamic budget every year. So 11 billion for the years 2021 to 27. Several other funds of the European Union also have a multi-year finance volume of 22 billion or so. All in the EU is going to spend about 22 billion for border protection until 2022, and all in one could calculate how much people one could save with all of that money. Now, what to do with all of that information? People might be interested in that. If one starts surveilling the Mediterranean to such detail that no one should drown, and yet people drown, that could be interesting data. And in a new discussion, Article 71, I believe, the cooperation with third parties, that article covers the cooperation with third parties that should now be started. So other countries shall now be connected to this system, which is not that simple, because it's only possible to work with governments, or one should only work together with governments that kind of sort of follow the spirit of the Human Rights Convention. But if the EU starts cooperating with states that don't care for human rights, that becomes kind of a problem. And there's a lot of work, a lot of creativity being invested in that area. And among other things, the idea is to start incorporating regional networks. There are already regional networks, for example, for the Mediterranean. One called Seahorse. It's not as cute as it sounds. All the states bordering to the Mediterranean and Portugal combine data in that network. And the idea is now to start connecting third-party states like Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, and Tunisia to that system. So it's a multilateral system. It's not a network of the European Union, but of some member states of the EU and others. And that system, the idea is now to connect that system to Eurosar. Now what you see in this image on the bottom is third state border networks, which shall also be connected to that system. In focus, of course, you have Libya, because most people start from Libya, because there's a lot of connections, a lot of refugees coming from Libya into Italy. And there is already an important control center in Italy with staff from Libya that is supposed to cover the Mediterranean, that probably already receives information from Italy. Now, interestingly, first up, this information isn't coming from the European Union, it's coming from one of the member states. Now, Italy can work together with Libya quite closely without even having an EU-level contract, because it's a contract between Italy and Libya. Italy also runs a sea rescue station for Libya, and that is financed by the EU with 44 million euro to surveil the Mediterranean and to try and run as many high seas rescue operations as possible. So only in international waters, not in Libyan waters. That you can see here on the map. By the way, also on the map you see who is responsible for the rescue operations in international waters. Interestingly, Malta has a very big area it needs to cover, and that's also the reason why they work together closely with other states to span that area. Now, there is no coordination for that sea rescue, no international coordination yet, and they now have an intermediate temporary station to cover that, which is surprisingly similar to the Eurosur nodes existing in several member states. And in practice, that means that Libya is now connected to this seahorse system in the Mediterranean. So Libya is now the first third-party country connected to that system. The German government even confirmed that this is slated to happen still within this month. Oh, by the way, this sea rescue zone for private sea rescue organizations, these are relatively impossible to reach. So far, it has been impossible to connect that to the Libyan state domain. A lot of work in Libya happens with militias because the government doesn't really control the whole of the country, but only subsets of it. So Libya, the first third party that's getting connected, to be followed by Egypt and Tunisia. And now the idea is for this collaboration not just to work in a bilateral fashion between Italy and Libya, but also between the European Union and third-party states. But that's not that simple, because the regulations have to be changed. But from my point of view, there would also have to be a state contract with Libya, between Libya and Frontex. And that's also the reason why I'm here, because this is now being discussed. There is a draft resolution for it, and in the end there will be a vote, but we can still influence it. All right. So all of these phenomena I now described, the Mediterranean is being surveilled. Where does the data go? We're giving it to Libya. Libya is rescuing in quotation mark, mostly bringing back, but rescuing in quotation mark more and more people. And here's an expression that you might have heard. It's a case against Italy for supporting supporting human rights violations. Where Italy told Sea-Watch, no, Libya needs to rescue. Now, what happens if Libya rescues is they don't have small boats, they don't carefully rescue people. They just go there with a big ship, let down big nets, and ask people to climb in, which is extremely dangerous. Libyans also tend to sometimes shoot at other ships. They also shot at German Navy ships, and it's very difficult to work together with them. So how do you rate these cases? There's a ground rule of not refusing people, stating broadly that you cannot send back people to a country where they are going to be persecuted. Of course, that would happen in Libya. This picture here was taken on Migrants' Day recently in Libya, where people were asked to show their rescue. They fell out of this recreation of a wooden boat and had to show how they climbed onto a rescue vessel, to the Libyans demonstrating how they would rescue people. You've also probably seen the media pictures of these refugee camps. Now, what I would recommend to you is read the Ruyasangi's article in the Süddeutsche Zeitung. The situation has further developed to be dangerous. The state sovereignty, she says, it is not only counted right at the border of the country, but also in the pre-border zone. So, stating that if someone has special information, privileged information, and hands that to another party in order for them to conduct an operation, then, for example, Italy then is bound by the European Declaration on Human Rights, and by acting on that information violates that declaration. Here, by the way, the vehicles from EMRK, from my point of view, the German military is also part of these operations, because these vehicles are used in such operations.
Finally, you all know that private rescue has been held back. Most ships have been captured in port by local governments. Later, they will also have a talk here on that topic. Ports have been closed to these ships by the Italian Ministry of the Interior, Mr. Salvini. You can't really do that, but this was a case of bigger guns make the law. Those who have fled should probably be distributed fairly. I don't think it's entirely bad. It's not entirely an Italian job. It's a European job to save these people. But we dumped it on the Italians, so they had no other way, despite the solution not being optimal. From my point of view, there should be a rescue mission by Europe. It should be a rescue mission, non-military. The Italians tried this once, and they saved something like 130,000 people within 8 months. And we need another one of those missions. I will end with a few slides on NGOs. These NGOs I show here claim that helping migrants has been criminalized. The Mediterranean is surveilled like no other sea in the entire world. So we should use the surveillance data we have to save human lives and not exclude refugees. Thank you.
Vielen lieben Dank an Matthias Monroy für diesen überaus exzellenten Vortrag. Wir haben im Saal multiple Mikrofone verteilt, 6 an der Stück. Bitte reiht euch da ein. Dann kann ich euch aufrufen, haltet eure Fragen bitte auf Fragen beschränkt und einen Satz. Das wäre super. Haben wir Fragen? Ich sehe hier Front-Mitte-Mikrofon.
Hallo, du hast ja erwähnt, dass Eurosur gerade in Verhandlung ist.
You said Iriswork is in
Steht die Verhandlung gerade? Hat das Parlament schon eine
speaking.
Position bestimmt oder nur der Rat oder ist es schon im Trilog?
Do you know where
Irgendwo eine Seite, Kampagnenseite,
the sessions stand? Is there already some
kontaktieren könnte?
so?
Gleich antworten? Also die Eurosur-Verordnung ist in den
So, the Eurosure legislation is in a state where the European Council has clarified its position and solidified it, and now this goes in the trialogue of European lawmaking. As far as I know, there's no campaign website,
Gap, den man füllen
and that's a gap that needs to be filled. I mean, there's a lot of activity in that area, you know, rescue.
Also auch jetzt quasi von Retterinnen, Rettern, deren Unterstützerinnen, Unterstützer.
By the rescuers themselves and their supporters.
Sozusagen die Diskussion der
But especially here, discussing the whole Eurosur thing,
Eurosur-Verordnung, sondern früher gab es eine Frontex-Verordnung und eine Eurosur-Verordnung.
which technically isn't a Eurosure thing, because before there was Frontex and Eurosure, and now they're being more or less stuck together. And that's the problem. And against that, we need a campaign website or a blog or something where we collect information about it. Another question at the back right.
Haben wir noch weitere Fragen? Wenn ihr am Mikrofon steht, hebt eure Hand.
Are there more questions? Do
Are
we
there
have
any
questions
questions
from
from
the
the
internet?
internet?
Ja, und zwar eine Frage wird gestellt bezüglich der Datenzusammenarbeit.
There's one question about
Datenzusammenarbeit.
the working together with the dates, with the data. And the question is, where would you have to ask for data?
Die Zusammenarbeit,
Also
den-
so wie ich das verstehe, wo müsste man einfordern, dass die Daten an die
Seenotretter gingen.
Seenotrettung weitergegeben werden?
So the question is, where would you have to ask for data for the rescuers?
Frontex einfordern, wobei die ja selber auch,
You should be able to get this data from Frontex. Then again, they themselves say they don't have a complete copy of it. Every year they do a report on the relevant situation.
ihre Rettungsleitstelle haben. Wenn jetzt
And once the Libyans have their coordination center and all the other ancillary systems are up and running, then they will be getting data from Frontex.
müsste man dann auch an die höhere Ebene gehen und das
So in that case, you could go one level up, the European Commission, and petition them to release that data.
kann ich nicht sagen.
I can't be more precise on that.
Noch eine weitere Frage aus dem Internet?
Any more questions from the internet?
Haben wir sonst noch Fragen aus dem Saal?
Any more questions?
Da gibt es eine Frage bitte an das Mikrofon. Und
If you have a question, please come to the microphone.
Gibt es eigentlich private Seenotrettung aus den nordafrikanischen Ländern?
Question is if there is private rescue from the North African countries.
Not with ships, as far as I know, but there are some organizations that work very closely.
Aus Leuten aus diesen Ländern, also
There are some European civilian organizations that work very closely or in part derive from people from these countries. There's an emergency telephone line,
die werden
and
auch von Aktivisten
these are generally financed and supported by activists from Morocco and Tunisia, for example. But I personally don't know of any ships.
nächste Frage.
Was würdest du sagen, mittelfristig, was da noch zu retten ist?
What would you say? What is there to rescue in meantime or short time?
Das sieht tatsächlich, oder das sah tatsächlich jetzt, sage ich mal, im Herbst so aus. Also weil,
This autumn it looked a bit critical because all ships were de facto out of operation for various reasons. But then the Italians, or a bunch of Italian social movements, sent the Iona out to sea, which has been working. It was a bunch of leftist groups, but also some low-level government agencies, local government, and they used this ship to challenge their own interior minister, Salvini. It was a political challenge saying, you are not going to impound this ship, and if you do, we're going to be standing in front of your door. It was similar to the organization Seebrücke. If you don't know Seebrücke, it's a German organization that works in the Mediterranean and it's existed for about a year. And they have ships down there right now. So I'd paint a slightly more positive picture, but the ships need political help at home. Right now there's 2 Sea-Watch boats on the water with refugees on board, but nobody's letting them offload them. And that needs political support.
One more question from the internet.
Ob bekannt ist, inwieweit deutsche und europäische Rüstungsindustrie in diesem Komplex involviert sind.
So, is it known how far the armor industry is involved in those processes?
They are involved because most of the technology I showed you today was developed, at least at first, for the military and then adapted to civilian use. As for German companies are involved, I can't say. But especially with satellites and large drones, the involvement of the high technology industry is significant. There are companies from any state, Saab from Sweden, Indra from Spain, Airbus from Europe, Deal Defense, who also produce for the Bundeswehr. So anti-militaristic campaigns can work together with us very, very well. Because the introduction of military technology into civilian life is one of their topics. There's another actor who's always there when there's bad things to be done, which is Fraunhofer, a bunch of institutes in Germany, research institutes who do research for the government. I forgot the acronym for them. But if you want to build a little pressure on them, then there are, of course, German companies that are involved who can be pressured. Oh, and if you're somehow involved in the satellite business, there's a lot to be done. The German Center for Air and Space is involved in getting the data down from the satellites. That information superhighway in space ends in Germany. It's done by EADS. EADS belongs to Airbus, and all the income from that goes to Airbus. So that's an interesting place where one could intervene.
Weiß man, woher das ganze Personal von verschiedenen Agenturen kommt? Also sind das irgendwie Polizistinnen und Polizisten, die von...
Is it know where all the personnel or the people from those agency are coming from? Are those police people or who are they?
Well, that's complicated. Generally, the personnel is from the EU member states. This includes the military missions. There's personnel working directly for EUNAVFOR, but most is on loan from other agencies. This has been that way since 2006. And EUNAVFOR has their own building, and there is personnel paid by Frontex there. And that's going to change now. As in that the amount of Frontex personnel is supposed to be doubled, and there will be a fast strike force, which does not work like Themis. So they don't ask, yeah, who can come, how many people have you got, how many helicopters. So they had to phone around to get their people and gear, but now it's supposed to be a sort of standing army, of which 2/3 belong to Frontex directly. There has been discussion about it. Some states have problems with this sort of thing, especially the governments on the right side, who basically went, what, border protection? We're going to do our own thing. We're not going to let some EU guy interfere with that. And they don't want Frontex to do anything, more or less. They want to do their own thing. Thank you, Matthias Monroy. Applause.